Kira stood at the edge of the crystal cliff, her silver hair flowing in the wind like liquid moonlight as she looked down at the human vessel approaching her domain. The ancient elf woman had lived for more than 5,000 years, and in all that time she had never met a human that she believed was worth her attention. Two massive dragons rested beside her, their scales shimmering with power that had been accumulated over millennia, and they had watched over this corner of the galaxy for longer than any human civilization had existed. The dragon Soren, whose scales burned like molten gold, turned his enormous head toward Kira with a rumbling sound that echoed across the mountains. Beside him, Lyra, the silver dragon with eyes that held ancient wisdom, watched the approaching ship with the same cold indifference her mistress possessed. Kira had spent centuries observing humanity from the safety of her isolated world, and every observation had reinforced her belief that humans were primitive creatures barely worth notice. She had watched their endless wars, their cruelty toward one another, their greed and violence that seemed to define every interaction between their kind. From her centuries of study, she knew that humans were crude and emotionally driven, slaves to their base instincts and utterly lacking in the sophistication and refinement that characterized truly advanced civilizations. The fact that one of their pathetic vessels had entered her territory was an insult that demanded a response, and Kira felt a surge of anger at their audacity. The human ship descended through the atmosphere with all the grace of a wounded bird, and Kira could not help but laugh at their clumsy attempts to navigate the complex atmospheric currents of her world. The vessel was clearly using primitive propulsion systems that seemed to struggle against the natural forces that buffeted it from side to side. She gestured to her dragons, and they rose to their full magnificent heights, spreading their enormous wings across the sky like a dark shadow. Soren's roar shook the ground beneath her feet, a sound of pure power that had been designed to terrify and intimidate any creature foolish enough to challenge the dragon's dominion over this world. The ship landed in the valley below with a heavy metallic clang that echoed through the mountains, and Kira descended the cliff face with supernatural grace, her feet barely touching the rocky surface as she moved with the fluid motion of someone who had mastered the physical world over countless ages. Her dragons flanked her on either side like living mountains of power and fury, their eyes fixed on the humans who were beginning to emerge from their vessel in bulky environmental suits that looked ridiculous compared to the elegant armor she wore. Kira had already decided that these humans would learn to fear her, and perhaps their terror would entertain her for a brief moment before she grew bored and destroyed them. The humans moved awkwardly across the alien terrain, their suits restricting their movement and making them look like strange insects crawling across the landscape. Kira counted them carefully and noted that there were 12 of them, each carrying equipment that looked fragile and poorly constructed. The lead human approached cautiously, moving slowly despite the obvious desire to advance quickly, and Kira noted with satisfaction that even from a distance, she could sense their panic through their clumsy body language and hesitant movements. This human removed their helmet, revealing a weathered face and determined eyes that belonged to a woman named Claire, who had been leading this exploration mission for the past 6 months. Claire stepped forward without hesitation, despite the overwhelming presence of the ancient creatures looming above her like mountains of scaled flesh and ancient power. Kira had expected fear, genuine terror that would validate her beliefs about humanity's weakness and inferiority. But what she saw instead was something different, something that made her pause for just a moment. There was respect in Claire's eyes, mixed with an odd kind of determination and intelligence that Kira had not anticipated. Claire spoke in a calm and steady voice, explaining that her people came seeking friendship and knowledge, not conflict or conquest, and that they had traveled millions of miles through the void of space, specifically to establish peaceful contact with advanced civilizations. The elf woman simply laughed, a sound like breaking ice that seemed to shake the very air around them, and told Claire that humanity was beneath her notice, that they were primitives who could never understand the sophistication of true civilization or the complexity of the universe. She explained that humans were merely insects to her, creatures whose entire history spanning just a few thousand years was insignificant compared to the ages that she had lived and the knowledge that she had accumulated. Kira told Claire that humans were driven by base emotions and primitive desires, that they were violent and destructive, and that they had no place among the truly advanced species of the galaxy. But then something unexpected happened, something that would change everything that followed. Claire did not cower or flee as Kira had anticipated, and instead the human woman stood tall and began to speak about humanity's greatest achievements. Claire did not focus on the wars and violence that Kira had studied and used to justify her contempt, but instead, she talked about the remarkable accomplishments of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their short lifespans. She spoke about humans who had walked into burning buildings to save strangers, risking their own lives without any expectation of reward or recognition for their heroic actions. Claire described doctors who had worked tirelessly for decades to cure diseases without any expectation of becoming wealthy or famous, driven only by their passion to help others and ease human suffering. She told Kira about teachers who had inspired generations of students despite having nothing but their passion and knowledge, working for modest wages and living simple lives dedicated to education. Claire talked about mothers who had sacrificed everything for their children, going without food or sleep to ensure that their young ones had better lives than they had experienced themselves. She spoke of artists and scientists who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, creating beauty and expanding knowledge despite having limited resources and short lifespans. With each story that Claire shared, Kira felt something shifting inside her consciousness, something that seemed to challenge the very foundation of everything she believed about humanity. The elf woman had spent centuries seeing only what she wanted to see, interpreting every human action through the lens of her prejudice and arrogance. But Claire's words forced her to consider that perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps her perspective had been distorted by her own pride and distance from humanity. She had observed humans from afar, but she had never truly tried to understand them, had never bothered to look deeply enough to see their true nature and their genuine capacity for greatness. Kira tried to dismiss these uncomfortable feelings, tried to cling to her old beliefs and her comfortable superiority, but the seeds of doubt had been planted deep within her mind, and they were growing with each word that Claire spoke. The dragons sensed the shift in their mistress's emotions, and they became quiet and watchful, waiting to see what she would do next and how she would respond to this challenge to her worldview. The elf woman realized with a shock that in all her centuries of watching humanity from a distance, she had never truly understood them, had never bothered to look deeply enough to see their true nature. Kira gestured for Claire and her team to follow her to her dwelling, a structure of crystalline beauty that rose from the mountainside like a palace carved from the sky itself. Inside, the air was filled with ancient technology and collected knowledge from across the galaxy, and Claire moved through the space with obvious wonder and respect. The human woman asked careful questions about everything she saw, approaching each artifact and device with genuine curiosity rather than greed or conquest. For the first time in her long life, Kira began to see a human not as a primitive creature to be scorned, but as an intelligent being capable of understanding and appreciating the complexity of the universe. As the sun set over the mountains and cast long shadows across the crystal halls, Kira found herself eager to speak with Claire again the next day, wanting to learn more about this remarkable human who had challenged everything she believed. The morning sun cast golden light across the crystal halls of Kira's dwelling, and the elf woman found herself awake before dawn, a rarity after thousands of years of controlling her own schedule and sleeping whenever she chose. She walked to the highest tower of her structure and looked down at the human camp below, where Claire and her team were already moving about, beginning their work for the day. Kira noticed that the humans worked together with remarkable efficiency, each person knowing their role and performing their duties without complaint or confusion. There was no hierarchy of power that she could detect, no obvious signs of the violence and conflict that she had always associated with human civilization. She descended from the tower and made her way to the camp, moving silently as she had learned to do over her centuries of existence. Claire looked up and greeted her with a genuine smile, not the fearful expression that Kira had expected. The human woman introduced her to the rest of her team, explaining each person's role and their unique skills and knowledge. There was Marcus, the engineer who had designed much of their equipment and who spoke with passionate intelligence about the systems that powered their vessel. There was Lisa, a biologist who asked thoughtful questions about the unique ecosystem of Kira's world and who moved through the landscape with respectful curiosity. There was Thomas, a historian who wanted to understand the ancient records that Kira had mentioned possessing. Over the following days, Kira spent increasing amounts of time with Claire's team, and she began to notice things that she had never seen in her previous observations of humanity from a distance. She watched as the humans treated each other with genuine respect, as they celebrated each person's contributions to their mission, no matter how small or large. When Marcus made a mistake in his calculations, no one mocked him or rejected him, but instead his teammates worked together to understand what had gone wrong and how to fix it. When Lisa became sick from the unfamiliar food, the entire team adjusted their activities to ensure that she could rest and recover without feeling as though she was burdening them. Kira found herself drawn to the way humans approached problems with creativity and innovation, using their limited resources to accomplish remarkable things. She watched Marcus work with scrap materials to repair a piece of their equipment, and she was impressed by the ingenuity and cleverness that he demonstrated. The engineer explained that humans had always learned to do more with less, had always found ways to adapt and survive in difficult circumstances, because their short lifespans meant that they could not rely on accumulating power over time, as immortal beings could. Every generation of humans had to solve the same problems anew, and this constant innovation had made them incredibly adaptable and creative. Claire asked Kira about her history, and the elf woman found herself sharing stories that she had not spoken about in centuries. She told Claire about the great wars of ages past, about civilizations that had risen and fallen, about the terrible mistakes that her people had made that had nearly destroyed them. She explained how she had retreated to her isolated world, to distance herself from the chaos and suffering of more densely populated regions of the galaxy. But as she shared these stories with Claire, Kira began to see them in a new light, to understand that her own people had committed many of the same atrocities that she had blamed on humanity, had made many of the same mistakes born from pride and arrogance. One evening, Claire and Kira sat together on the cliff edge overlooking the valleys below, and the human woman asked a question that seemed to penetrate directly into Kira's deepest thoughts. Claire asked what would happen when humans inevitably developed technology that rivaled or surpassed that of the elf civilization. She asked whether Kira believed that humans would be capable of using such technology responsibly, or whether their primitive nature would lead them to destroy themselves and potentially threaten others. Kira realized that this was the heart of her prejudice, her fear that humanity would eventually become powerful enough to be dangerous, and her belief that it was better to maintain her superiority through isolation and distance. But then Claire did something remarkable. She told Kira about the history of human development, about how humans had nearly destroyed their own world multiple times through warfare and environmental destruction. But she also explained how humans had pulled back from the brink of self-destruction, how they had made choices to preserve their world and to work together toward peaceful coexistence. She spoke about the agreements that humans had established to prevent nuclear warfare, about the conservation efforts that had saved endangered species from extinction, and about the international cooperation that had become increasingly common as humans understood the consequences of conflict. Claire explained that humans were not inherently destined to be destructive or cruel, that they had the capacity to choose differently when given the information and understanding to make better decisions. She told Kira that many humans lived their lives based on principles of compassion and cooperation, that they worked to build peace and understanding, even when it would have been easier to resort to violence and conflict. The human woman argued that Kira's isolation and contempt had actually been a form of self-fulfilling prophecy, that by refusing to interact with humans or to share knowledge that could help them develop responsibly, the elf woman had actually made it more likely that humanity would develop in a destructive manner. Soren and Lyra had been watching these exchanges from a distance, and Kira noticed that the dragons seemed to have accepted the human presence with less reservation than she would have expected. The golden dragon had allowed Marcus to touch his scales one afternoon, and the engineer had been so moved by the experience that he had wept with joy at the contact with an ancient and magnificent being. The silver dragon Lyra had eaten food that Lisa had offered her, a gesture of trust and acceptance that seemed to signal the dragon's approval of these humans. Kira began to wonder if perhaps her dragons had understood something about humanity that she had been too proud to see, if they had recognized the potential for genuine connection and understanding between their species. That night, Kira made a decision that would change everything. She decided to invite Claire and her team to stay for a full year, to truly learn about human nature, and to share the accumulated knowledge of her civilization with them in return. She decided that she would teach them about her world, about the technologies and sciences that her people had developed over thousands of years. More importantly, she decided that she would approach this exchange with an open mind and a genuine willingness to learn from humans as much as they might learn from her. When she shared this decision with Claire the next morning, the human woman's face lit up with genuine joy and gratitude. Claire embraced Kira in a gesture of human friendship that the elf woman had never experienced before. And for the first time, she understood the power of physical contact and emotional connection between beings of different species. The dragons seemed to celebrate as well, with Soren letting out a roar that echoed across the mountains and Lyra performing a graceful flight pattern through the sky that seemed to express pure delight. Over the following weeks, Kira began to teach the humans about her world and her people, and she began to truly see humanity through their eyes, rather than through the distorted lens of her prejudice. She watched as the humans approached each new piece of knowledge with excitement and gratitude, as they worked to understand complex concepts that had taken her people centuries to develop. She realized that humans had a remarkable capacity for growth and learning, and that their relatively short lifespans actually gave them an advantage in adapting to new situations and perspectives. As the seasons changed and the year progressed, Kira felt herself being transformed by her interactions with these remarkable people, and she began to understand that she had been wrong about humanity all along. 3 months into their year together, a crisis emerged that would test everything that Kira and the humans had been building. One of Claire's team members, a young engineer named David, became seriously ill with a fever that seemed to worsen with each passing hour. The human medical supplies were limited, and the local environment of Kira's world contained microorganisms that David's immune system had no experience fighting. Claire came to Kira with fear in her eyes, asking if the elf woman had medical knowledge that could help save David's life. The ancient being realized that this moment would define whether her transformation was genuine or merely superficial. Kira moved into action immediately, using her advanced understanding of biology and chemistry to develop a treatment based on compounds found in the plants and minerals of her world. She worked alongside Claire and the other humans through long nights, demonstrating techniques and knowledge that seemed almost magical to the observers, but were simply the result of her thousands of years of accumulated learning. Marcus assisted her with precision and intelligence, understanding the complex procedures that Kira was implementing and adapting them to work with the human medical equipment. Lisa used her biological knowledge to help identify which organisms in Kira's environment might be causing David's illness. As Kira worked to save David's life, she realized that she was experiencing something completely new in her existence. For the first time in her 5,000 years, she cared deeply about whether a human lived or died, not because it would benefit her or serve her purposes, but simply because David mattered to her as a person and as a friend. She thought about everything that David had shared about his family back on his home world, about the mother who had raised him alone, about the sister who was counting on him to return safely. She thought about David's dreams and ambitions, his passion for engineering, and his desire to use his skills to help other beings across the galaxy. The treatment that Kira developed proved effective, and after a week of careful application and monitoring, David's fever began to subside. His color improved, his breathing became easier, and gradually he returned to consciousness and recovery. When David finally spoke, thanking Kira for saving his life, the elf woman found tears streaming down her face for the first time in centuries. She realized that she had been changed fundamentally by this experience, that she was no longer the cold and distant being who had stood on the cliff observing humanity with contempt. She had become someone who valued human life and human connection in ways that she had never thought possible. Claire held Kira's hand in a gesture of comfort and gratitude, and the elf woman understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. She could never go back to her isolation and her arrogance, could never unsee the beauty and strength that she had witnessed in humanity. Over the following weeks, as David recovered fully, Kira found herself reflecting on all the decisions and beliefs that had led her to this moment. She began to understand how prejudice had shaped her thinking, how her isolation had reinforced her negative views of humanity, and how easy it had been to dismiss an entire species based on limited observation and her own biases. During this time, Kira also discovered something remarkable about the human capacity for forgiveness. Despite the contempt that she had expressed toward humanity, Despite her obvious belief in their inferiority, Claire and her team treated her with kindness and respect. They did not hold grudges against her for her previous arrogance, but instead seemed genuinely interested in the transformation that she was undergoing. They celebrated her growth and her willingness to admit that she had been wrong about so many things. Kira asked Claire why they did not resent her, why they did not remind her constantly of her prejudice and her cruelty. Claire simply explained that humans understood the difficulty of changing deeply held beliefs, understood that it took courage to admit error, and believed that people deserved the opportunity to grow and change without being perpetually punished for their past mistakes. The dragons also played an important role in this transformation. Soren began to spend significant time with the humans, allowing them to ride on his back and explore the landscape from a new perspective. Lyra developed a particular fondness for Lisa, and the silver dragon seemed to enjoy the biologist's company and her careful observations about the local ecosystem. Kira realized that her dragons had probably understood from the beginning that these humans were worthy of respect and friendship, and she felt a mixture of affection and amusement at her own stubbornness and pride. As the months progressed, Kira began to share increasingly advanced knowledge with Claire's team. She taught them about technologies that could revolutionize human civilization, about medical techniques that could extend human lifespans and reduce suffering, but she also taught them about the dangers of power without wisdom, about the importance of using advanced technology responsibly and ethically. She told them about civilizations that had destroyed themselves through the misuse of their own creations, and about the long process of learning that her own people had undergone to develop the wisdom that now guided their use of technology. Claire, in turn, shared with Kira the dreams and hopes of humanity, the vision of a species that wanted to spread peace and knowledge throughout the galaxy, that wanted to establish cooperation and friendship with advanced civilizations rather than conflict and competition. She told Kira about the philosophers and artists who guided human thinking, about the principles of compassion and justice that had shaped human laws and institutions. She explained that humanity was still young as a civilization, was still learning and growing, but that the potential for something great existed within her people if they were given guidance and support from more advanced beings. The turning point in Kira's complete transformation came one evening, when Claire asked her a direct question. The human woman asked Kira whether if she had remained on her cliff overlooking the valley, isolated and contemptuous, she would have been happy for the rest of her existence. Kira realized that the answer was no, that her previous existence had been lonely and empty despite all its material comfort and intellectual stimulation. She had been existing without truly living, going through the motions of an eternal existence without finding genuine meaning or connection. Her friendship with Claire and her team had given her something that all her centuries of isolation had never provided, a sense of purpose and belonging that made her feel truly alive for the first time. As the year neared its completion, Kira made plans to send technical data and knowledge back to human civilization, offering to establish a formal alliance between her people and humanity. She knew that this decision would be controversial among her own kind, that there would be other ancient beings who would judge her as harshly as she had once judged humans, but she also knew that she could never go back to her old way of thinking, and that humanity deserved the opportunity to develop with the support and guidance of older civilizations, rather than being left to struggle alone in a galaxy that could be dangerous and hostile. The year with Claire and her team had taught her that true strength came not from isolation and superiority, but from connection and cooperation with others. The final months of the year brought unexpected challenges that pushed Kira's commitment to her new understanding of humanity even further. Signals began to arrive from the outer edges of her world's orbit, indicating that a hostile force was approaching. The scanners identified the vessel as belonging to the Krithara, an ancient alien species known for their conquest and exploitation of younger civilizations. Kira's blood ran cold as she realized the danger, not just to her own people, but now to Claire and her team who had become precious to her. Kira gathered Claire and her leadership team and explained the situation with complete honesty. The Krithara were vastly more powerful than the human vessel, and they had already destroyed several human colonies in recent years. Kira told Claire that she could protect her and her team by taking them to one of her hidden facilities deep underground, where they would be safe from any attack. But she also explained that this would mean leaving the human vessel and the rest of the human colony undefended against the coming threat. Claire listened carefully to everything that Kira said, and then she asked a question that shocked the elf woman with its implications. Claire asked Kira if the humans could help defend her world against the Krithara. The human woman explained that humanity had faced difficult odds before and had learned to be creative and resourceful when facing superior enemies. Claire believed that working together, the humans and the elf woman and her dragons could find a way to defeat or at least repel the Krithara threat. Kira felt a surge of emotions that she struggled to process. Claire was asking her to treat humans as equals in the defense of her world. Was treating the human contribution as valuable and necessary, rather than insignificant and worthless. Over the next days, they developed a defense strategy together that combined Kira's advanced technology and knowledge with the creative problem-solving and adaptability that the humans brought to the table. Marcus designed modifications to their vessel that would allow it to function as a defensive platform, using Kira's weapons technology integrated with human engineering. Lisa worked with Kira to understand the biology of the Krithara, identifying potential weaknesses that might be exploited in combat. Claire coordinated the entire effort with remarkable skill, keeping everyone focused and motivated despite the obvious danger they all faced. When the Krithara vessel finally appeared in orbit around Kira's world, it was massive and intimidating, a warship designed specifically for conquest and destruction. The Krithara sent a message demanding that Kira surrender her world and all her technology to them, threatening to destroy everything if she refused. For a moment, Kira felt the old doubt trying to creep back into her mind. She wondered if she should have simply protected her own interests, if she should have abandoned the humans to save herself. But then she looked at Claire standing beside her, calm and determined despite the danger, and she knew that she could never betray these people who had shown her what it meant to be truly civilized. Kira activated her defenses and positioned her dragons and the human vessel to face the incoming threat. Soren and Lyra took to the sky, their ancient power radiating across the planet's atmosphere. The human ship moved into position, its modified weapons system ready to engage. But before the battle could fully commence, Kira did something unexpected. She opened communications with the Krithara commander and began to explain that if they attacked, they would face not just her dragons and her technology, but also the combined creativity and determination of human civilization. She told the Krithara commander about the humans' remarkable ability to adapt and innovate, about their capacity to do more with limited resources than any species she had encountered in her 5,000 years of existence. She explained that humanity would not go quietly, that they would fight with the same determination that had allowed them to overcome countless obstacles in their brief history as a spacefaring civilization. Most importantly, she told the Krithara commander that if they destroyed these humans, they would be destroying something precious and irreplaceable, something that had value beyond simple material calculation. The Krithara commander seemed taken aback by this impassioned defense of humanity. They were not accustomed to seeing ancient beings speak so highly of younger, more primitive civilizations. They demanded that Kira explain why she would risk her own world and her own people for the sake of humans who were, after all, only temporary beings with lifespans measured in mere decades. Kira's response was simple and profound. She explained that the value of a being could not be measured in the length of their lifespan or the advancement of their technology, but in the choices they made and the impact they had on others. She told the Krithara that she valued her human friends more deeply than any being she had encountered in her long existence, and that she would fight to the last breath to defend them. This conversation seemed to have an effect on the Krithara. The massive warship did not immediately attack, but instead entered into extended negotiations with Kira. She offered the Krithara access to some of her technology in exchange for leaving the human civilization alone and allowing them to develop peacefully. The negotiations were complex and difficult, but Kira used her knowledge of the Krithara culture and their methods to secure an agreement that protected humanity while also satisfying the Krithara's desire for gain and advantage. When the Krithara finally agreed to depart, leaving only a monitoring station to ensure compliance with the new treaty, Claire embraced Kira with tears of gratitude and relief streaming down her face. The elf woman held the human woman, realizing that this moment represented the culmination of her transformation. She had faced a choice between her old way of thinking and her new understanding of humanity, and she had chosen without hesitation to stand with her human friends. She had proven to herself that her change of heart was genuine and deep, not merely a superficial adjustment in her behavior. Over the following weeks, as preparations were made for the humans to return to their home world, Kira worked with Claire to establish formal diplomatic channels between human civilization and the remnants of the ancient elf civilization. She provided humans with technology that would allow them to defend themselves against future threats, and she established a promise that the elf would provide guidance and support as humanity continued to develop. But more importantly, she established a personal bond with Claire that would last for the rest of the human woman's life, a friendship that transcended the vast differences in their ages and species. Kira also made the decision to break her isolation completely. She would leave her world periodically to visit human territories and learn more about the civilization that had so transformed her worldview. She realized that she had spent 5,000 years alone with her dragons, waiting for what she called intelligent companionship, when she could have been building relationships with humans all along. The dragons seemed pleased with this decision, and Soren and Lyra began making preparations to accompany their mistress on regular journeys to visit the humans and continue their education about what it meant to be truly civilized. 5 years passed since Claire and her team had first landed on Kira's world, and the elf woman found herself at the center of a remarkable transformation that was spreading throughout both human and ancient civilizations. The story of her journey from contempt to respect had become legendary across the galaxy, inspiring other ancient beings to reconsider their own prejudices and to open themselves to the possibility of meaningful contact with younger species. Kira had become an advocate for humanity in the councils of ancient civilizations, using her considerable influence and knowledge to argue for cooperation and peaceful coexistence rather than isolation and dominance. Claire was no longer young, though the treatments that Kira had shared had extended her lifespan significantly. The human woman had become the primary ambassador between human civilization and the ancient elf people, and she traveled regularly with Kira and her dragons to negotiate agreements and establish protocols for cooperation. The two women had become more than friends. They had become sisters in everything except blood, bonded together by their shared journey toward understanding and respect. They spent long hours discussing philosophy and the nature of civilization, debating the responsibilities of advanced beings toward younger species, and planning the future of galactic peace and cooperation. Kira's world had transformed from an isolated fortress into a center of learning and cooperation. Human scientists came to study her vast libraries and her advanced technologies, while elf scholars came to learn from human innovations and human ways of thinking. The exchange of knowledge had proven beneficial for both civilizations, as humans had introduced new perspectives and problem-solving approaches that had never occurred to the ancient elf people. Kira's dragons had become symbols of the bridge between species, with young humans and young elves both seeking opportunities to interact with and learn from these magnificent creatures. The crystal halls that had once been cold and sterile now filled with laughter and conversation. Humans and elves worked together on research projects that sought to solve some of the galaxy's most pressing problems. They collaborated on medical advances that would help both species live longer and healthier lives. They worked together on environmental restoration projects, cleaning up worlds that had been damaged by the conflicts and exploitation of the past. They developed new technologies that could be shared with other species to help them build better civilizations. Kira had also undergone significant personal changes. She had learned to experience emotions more fully, to laugh and cry with genuine feeling, rather than the cold observation that had characterized her previous existence. She had learned to cook human food alongside alien dishes, and she had discovered that she actually enjoyed the simple rituals of daily life when they were shared with people she cared about. She had learned to play music with Claire, had learned to dance at human celebrations and festivals, and had experienced joy in ways that her centuries of isolation had never permitted. One day, a young elf came to Kira seeking guidance. This elf had been living in isolation like Kira had, and was struggling with the question of whether to accept the reality of the transformation that had occurred. The young elf expressed skepticism about humanity, asking why ancient beings should trust species that were so short-lived and prone to mistakes. Kira listened carefully to all of the young elf's concerns, and then she shared her own journey and her understanding of what had changed her perspective. Kira, explained that she had been taught throughout her life that advancement and value were measured in lifespan and accumulated power, but that she had come to understand that these were not the true measures of worth. She told the young elf that humans had shown her that the true measure of a civilization was not how long its members lived or how much power they possessed, but how they treated each other, how they cared for their vulnerable members, and how they approached the future with hope and determination. She explained that humans had shown her that it was possible to create meaning and purpose in a short life, and that this had taught her more about what it truly meant to be civilized than all her centuries of isolation had. The young elf asked Kira if she regretted her previous isolation, if she wished that she could go back to the way things had been before the humans arrived. Kira thought about this question carefully, and then she gave an answer that represented the complete transformation that had occurred within her. She explained that she could never regret the choice to open herself to understanding humanity, because that choice had given her existence genuine meaning for the first time. She told the young elf that she had spent 5,000 years alive, but not truly living, existing but not experiencing connection and purpose. It was only through her friendship with humans that she had learned what it truly meant to be alive. Soren and Lyra seemed to understand the significance of this conversation. The golden dragon approached the young elf and lowered his massive head, a gesture of greeting and friendship that the ancient creature had learned from watching human interactions. The silver dragon Lyra produced a low rumbling sound that seemed to be an expression of approval and encouragement. The young elf, moved by the dragon's acceptance, asked if they too would help teach him about humanity and about the possibility of genuine cooperation between ancient and younger civilizations. Kira offered to bring the young elf to meet human explorers and researchers who had come to her world, and she watched with satisfaction as the skeptical young elf gradually came to see humanity as the remarkable species that they truly were. Over the following months, the young elf became an advocate for human-elf cooperation, and several other ancient beings began to follow Kira's example and open themselves to contact with younger civilizations. The transformation was slow, but it was genuine, and it was spreading throughout the galaxy. Years continued to pass, and Claire eventually reached the end of her extended lifespan, though the years she had gained through Kira's treatments had allowed her to accomplish more than any human had ever dreamed possible. As Claire lay dying with Kira holding her hand, the human woman expressed no regrets about her life. She told Kira that she had lived more fully and more meaningfully than any human had ever lived before, and that she was grateful for every moment that she had spent building bridges between species and working toward peace. Kira grieved deeply for her friend and sister, and she created a monument to Claire on her world, a testament to the human woman's remarkable legacy and her role in transforming not just Kira, but entire civilizations. The monument became a pilgrimage site for both humans and elves, a place where beings of different species could come together to remember what Claire had accomplished and to recommit themselves to the principles of cooperation and understanding that she had embodied. In the centuries that followed, Kira became known throughout the galaxy as the ancient being who had chosen to break free from prejudice and isolation. Her dragons remained at her side, symbols of the bridge between species that she had helped to build. New generations of humans and elves grew up knowing stories about the elf woman and the dragons who had chosen to see the value in humanity, and these stories inspired countless other beings to approach different species with openness and respect rather than fear and contempt. Kira's transformation from arrogance to humility had become more than just a personal journey. It had become a beacon of hope for all the civilizations of the galaxy, showing them that change was possible, that understanding could overcome prejudice, and that the greatest strength came not from isolation and power, but from genuine connection and cooperation with those different from ourselves.